Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. It is Wednesday, the 28th of December. I'm Reagan King and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Simon Barrett. We thought it would be a great idea this evening to look back on some of the events of 2022, events which some of them we've discussed before they even happened, and we're talking about most critically and crucially, as we'll come to see in a moment, the war in Ukraine. This was first discussed, Simon, in April of 2021, I believe, by us, and then we did 2 or 3 other programs before the invasion actually happened. But throughout this year, we've seen how God has been working in and through all manner of circumstances, and has, even in very difficult days, even in very trying times, used His people to witness to His glory. So thank you for tuning in to this evening's special edition, final edition of 22 Behind the Headlines.
Reagan, I think what's so extraordinary about the year 2022, and particularly looking at the prophetic significance of major news events that we've seen, it's almost as if this year we've had a decade crammed into 1 year. As previously, some of the events that we've seen have been absolutely incredible. Obviously, what's happened, the big news story of 2022 is the Russian invasion of the Ukraine back in February, and that has triggered a destabilization in the world, brought the world closer to nuclear conflict. It's caused a massive energy crisis, a food crisis, and the world has been destabilized effectively due to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. And then, of course, we've also seen President Biden, the US president's official visit to Israel in 2021. We have a new government in Israel. Britain had 3 prime ministers this year, finally ending up with Rishi Sunak. We've had the death of our beloved Queen, our longest serving monarch in our history, with a new king in King Charles. And of course, we've also seen that the American Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade on federal abortion laws. We had the very toxic US midterm elections. We've had Israel again becoming the center stage of our world news, but also looking at innovation and technology, moving us towards the mark of the beast, and of course the women's protests in Iran as well. So it's been an extraordinary year. How important is it that we start the beginning of the year, and how, as you mentioned before in this program, that we actually did 3 or 4 programs before the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, saying, look, this is going to happen.
This is what's happening, yeah. Yeah, this is it's very important that we remind ourselves of the significance of events that have occurred this year. And it's also important that we remind you, our viewers, that the point of this program is hopefully to equip you and prepare you not just with facts from the news that you can read, but to go behind that and look at the spiritual and potential prophetic significance of many of these events. We trust that as we enter into a new year, as we enter into 2023, that there will be more insight along these lines that we're able to give and grant. But I think critically, Simon, one of the biggest stories was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And this is something that we've talked about. This is something that throughout this year we've come back to. You mentioned the sign of technology. We've talked about the credit card chip in the hand that has been promoted. We had addressed that even a year ago as well, as China developing the mark of the beast. I believe that's the most viewed Behind the Headlines on YouTube. And so we are seeing a lot of these conversations that we're having play out in real life. Let's remind ourselves a little bit about that, one of those initial programs we did. How is the war in Ukraine helping to fulfill Bible prophecy?
I mean, what's extraordinary is that if it wasn't for the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, then Europe also wouldn't need to wean itself off Russia's oil and gas. We're also seeing that this is actually triggering the European Union to be more united than it ever has been before because of the existential threat posed by Russia. And of course, cause of President Macron of France calling for a unified European army made up of something like 5,000 troops. And of course, this is all accelerating before our very eyes, including food shortages as well. So it's a very, very precarious situation. But going back to the kind of nuclear issue, I heard on the news just before I came that Russian forces now, whether they're Chechen or not, are bombing other nuclear plants in the Ukraine with shelling. I mean, it's just madness. Also, we have to understand that Russia's invasion in the Ukraine has not only caused the biggest refugee crisis that we've seen in over 80 years since the Second World War, but it also triggered a massive wave of Jewish aliyah out of the Ukraine, out of Belarus and Russia, and the biggest that we've seen in over 2 decades in fulfilling biblical prophecy. The other topic that we discussed as well, which was very significant when we're talking about the one world religion, was how the United Arab Emirates are building a church called the Abrahamic House that will be a church, a mosque and a synagogue, effectively to build a kind of one world religion, but also wanting to show the kind of Abrahamic brotherhood in Saudi Arabia. And we know as Christians that Jesus said, I am the... Sorry, do you want to say the scripts?
Yeah, well, we see he's the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so this very idea of a one-world religion or of unifying all of the faiths is completely antithetical to biblical theology. We can't take what the Scriptures say and act as if there's some sort of universal religion that's acceptable that links in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Baha'i, Hinduism, all of these. We have to ask what's true. I was talking about this recently, Simon, with someone who's an agnostic. We had a good 2-hour conversation, and I said it's critical that we realize the truth is in the identity of who Jesus is. Very few individuals in this world will deny the existence of Jesus. Very few will deny that Jesus was a good man. Even among those most critical of Jesus, they'll still say he was a good teacher or he did a lot of good things. But ultimately, we have to ask, what about the claims Jesus made of himself, the claims the New Testament particularly sees made of him? How did those match up with the claims the prophets would make of the Messiah, the prophets in the Old Testament? And where does this all fit in the broader historical sphere? And I think what you'll find is a very clear and compelling, coherent case that Jesus is who he claimed to be, meaning that that's at the exclusion of all others. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So there's that exclusivity in regard to salvation found in Christ alone.
Amen. So let's have a look at this previous edition of Behind Headlines called Is the Abrahamic Family House One Step Away from a One World Religion? This construction is due to be finished sometime this year in 2022, and on this site there is a mosque and a synagogue, and there's also a church. It's meant to develop peaceful coexistence between the 3 major monotheistic religions, but we're asking, could this be the start of the one world religion?
Again, we have to recognize the significance of this. In the light of Bible prophecy, definitely we see that this is going to be a move of the Antichrist as well to bring everything under his control.
Absolutely, by creating a kind of one world religion, and we saw the first evidence of it there in the United Arab Emirates. The other issue as well, because with these programs as well, I think it's also very important, Reagan, that we look back at key historical events that have shaped the world, that have shaped history, and how we've got to honour these dates and remember them. And of course, back in April of 2022, we remember the 80th anniversary of the small island in the Mediterranean off the coast of Sicily receiving the kind of George Cross for its bravery, for its courage, for its fortitude in defying the Nazis. And if it wasn't for the courage shown by those people on Malta, then we know that the North African campaign by Rommel's forces would have won. The British would have been kicked out of North Africa, out of Egypt. The Nazis would have been in control of the Suez Canal. And also this would have meant the destruction of the Jewish community in the British Mandate of Palestine, rounded up by the SS. So just draw upon us the spiritual and also political and military significance of the island of Malta and its amazing ability to push back that Nazi aggression.
Well, it was quite critical, even though a very small island. We see it found itself at a juncture wherein it could block, it could hinder, or it could let through ships of various kinds for aid of all sorts. I mean, the Nazis particularly, they needed Malta. And this is why we see they absolutely pounded Malta with their military might. The people were essentially under siege. There was starvation, there was illness, the propensity for disease was spreading was rife. But we see that God kept those people. There was resilience, there was courage, there was organization, there was strategy intact, and ultimately they outlasted the Germans buying enough time for the Allies to come to their aid eventually. So here is our discussion, a little bit of our discussion of that very key historic event.
Malta is a small Mediterranean island that's only 90 miles off the coast of Sicily, but during World War II played a major role, as we see on this map, of actually preventing the supply lines going from Italy to the colony of Libya that was held by Italy to help with the North African campaign. And literally, this story is a forgotten story of history, but it's also one in which we see God's sovereignty. If Malta was captured by the Italians and by the Nazis and by the Axis powers, this could have changed the whole course of the war. Reagan, I love these historical programs, primarily because when we look at them, we study them, we see the hand of God in these events that occurred over 80 years ago. And who would have thought that this small little island off the coast of Sicily would be so strategic during the Second World War, with its population of around 250,000 people, would actually have a massive say on the final outcome of the Second World War and played a crucial role. Also thanks to its governor, who was a born-again believer, who was posted to this position.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I mean, we're having this program as it is the 80th anniversary of Malta being awarded the St. George's Cross because they defied the Nazis, and they consistently persevered in their persistent resistance against Nazi Germany. Well, just a reminder that our viewers can go back and you can remind yourself of these episodes and any other by the Revelation TV website, www.revelationtv.com, or you can find us on YouTube, and there you can actually leave comments and like the video, and there are sharing facilities as well. So do make use of that, especially with these historical programs. Those are very easy to look back on. They have enduring relevance. Educate yourself on some of these historic moments of importance and interest, and share them with others who you think might benefit from.
Yeah. What I know now, I didn't know back in April, thanks to the excellent BBC drama series called SAS Rogue Heroes, based on Ben McIntyre's book, again of the same name, SS Rogue Heroes, where he was given exclusive access to look at the files relating to the formation of the world's elite fighting force known as the Secret Air Service, the SAS. And in one of the episodes of that, it shows how that the SAS carried out audacious attacks against the German forces in North Africa, particularly the Luftwaffe, blowing up Messerschmitt 109s. And it was because of their raids that enabled some of the much needed supplies to be sent to Malta. And because the SAS took out so many of the German kind of airfields in North Africa as well as in Greece as well, it meant that those aid convoys could actually get to Malta, which delivered Malta in the Second World War, which played a key part. So, you know, it's so important that we look at history and we also realise that the governor was a born-again Christian who used to pray and intercede, and just shows the difference of what happens, you know, if we stand up and we're counted and pray and intercede, and we see God's miraculous protection over the strategic island of Malta.
Absolutely, and there's that saying that's well known: those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And I think a lot of these big incidences of history that we see with, like, the rise of the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, it's like a signpost of what's to come. It's a reminder of what we're looking ahead to. Of course, Hitler received a great deal of acclaim in Germany and across even other European nations, that there was much celebration of Hitler. There were some who tragically viewed him as the Messiah come again. It just beggars belief, but this was the evil possession of Nazi Germany. And yet we can look at the resilience and the faithfulness of many believers in those times and glean many lessons from them in regard to the tragedies and troubles that we may face in life, both in the present day and in the future. And one of those issues has to do with our consideration of end times, our consideration of particularly, of course, we know in one sense we're living in the end times. We're living in this last age between Christ's ascension into heaven and His return again in glory. But the times and seasons seem to be drawing closer to the point of our Lord's return. And as we are considering, having already seen this about one world religion center essentially in Abu Dhabi, now we also are seeing a lot related to one world currency. And so we asked the question, is a digital currency one step away from the mark of the beast?
And I think this is a very important topic, because I think when we look at the innovation, particularly after Covid-19, the one issue that seems to be beginning to gain greater traction and greater ground is this whole concept of a digital currency. So we know that, for example, banks in America have tested this. Chase Bank, I think Bank of America, other American banks, to actually test whether they can go digital, ditch cash. We also know, for example, that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, also looked into moving towards a digital currency. I think this is the biggest revolution that we are going to see in our lifetimes, Reagan, myself and you and myself, really, when we look at this technological advancement. Because what they're talking about is essentially ending banking. There won't be any independent banks. There'll just be one federal bank, and that we'll live in a cashless society. We're not saying that this is the mark of the beast, but it was also showing that what is being built is almost the infrastructure for the mark of the beast. And in terms of being Bible prophecy students, this is a major, major significant step in terms of what the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 13, say about the mark of the beast.
Here was some of our discussion on that topic. It's incredibly important as we look at our world and its rapidly evolving systems and culture to assess the teaching in the scriptures, particularly Revelation 13, in regard to the technologies that will be forming the basis for that day and time when it will be impossible to buy and sell unless one has this particular mark. We are rapidly approaching a cashless society. It's being almost imposed upon us. You will not have missed that. Many shops are now only accepting bank cards. They're only accepting other forms of currency. And as we increasingly see this normalized and cash removed, we can see, I think there are grounds to see how a cashless society is very much laying the ground technologically for this mark of the beast. Simon.
Quite frightening when you think about it, because most people are kind of asleep to this, but it seems that technology is really pushing this. So the fact is that they've, and certainly the Covid-19 pandemic as well, accelerated contactless cards, credit cards for paying that one. Very few people are actually using cash now, and predictions are that in this country alone, we could be heading towards a cashless society by 2026. So that's only less than 4 years away. And the technological gap that is just really driving this is through the World Economic Forum. I mean, they set out their plans in 2020 for the Great Global Reset, where they said that we will build back better and leveling up. In other words, they will level up the third world economies with the first world economies, and that we will be happy owning nothing. Now they seem to be the main driving force behind this new digital currency. Now, having researched this today, and this is what our viewers should be aware of, that this will mean the end of banking.
I think, Simon, in that one I also detailed a little bit about an experience that's kind of related, in which I went into a new Amazon Fresh store. And in that Amazon Fresh store, I mean, I just went thinking, okay, I want to figure this out, what it's like. I hear that you don't have cashiers, you don't have tills or registers or anything. There's a security gate at the front. You use your Amazon code that they give you on an Amazon app to scan in. And I walked around and I thought, but how does it all charge you? How do they know what to charge? And of course, your payment details are on this Amazon app. You walk in and I asked the guy, I said, so how does it know what you've taken? And he said, oh, we have cameras everywhere, look. And he just pointed all the apparatus, all of Amazon's special software and devices, Amazon Echo and Dot, all of these things around cameras, microphones. The shelves are weighted so that it can tell when something's been removed and when something needs restocked. But it's all there so that when you leave, because of the camera, the code, and the weighting on the shelves, it just withdraws the money from your account. So yeah, very high tech, quite neat in one way, but honestly, I think a bit dystopian.
I would say very dystopian. I had an experience flying with British Airways, Terminal 5. You get there, got there, parked my car, got to one of those little buses, takes you to the airport, you get to the terminal, go up to the lift to the departure lounge, no one around. So literally you kind of scan your passport, you scan your ticket, then you get to check your bag in, again no one's around, scan the your airline ticket, scans it, they gives you a wrapper, puts it on it, machine sees it, weighs the bag and puts it through. This is where we're heading. But the danger, I think, for Christians is not only is that we're heading towards the mark of the beast and the infrastructure of the mark of the beast. I think one thing we haven't shown, we won't show on this program, is the brave Canadian truckers, the freedom truckers that we did a program on back in January of 2022. But what that showed was, and these are people that don't have a digital currency, the Trudeau government was still able to shut the funding off of those truckers so they wouldn't get paid. and had their bank accounts frozen, together with those who had raised money to support them, was suddenly cut off. So there's a danger going ahead with this digital currency that if we don't abide by everything the government wants us to do, if we are standing out on certain social issues, then we're in real danger of losing our kind of finances and being controlled that way. I think this is one of the big dangers as we move towards a digital currency.
Absolutely. Now, another critical point in which we see our society has changed in the world in many, many ways was the overturning of the American federal abortion law inscribed by Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was struck down, and we asked, what does overturning American federal abortion laws mean to God?
One of our first behind the headlines that we did together back in 2020 was the controversy surrounding President Trump's decision to nominate Amy Barrett as a Supreme Justice. And the fact then that we looked and explored the possibility, could Roe v. Wade be overturned? Could this almost impossible ruling that was made back in 1973 be overturned and changed? So we thought that maybe with Amy Barrett there and the other judges there, that because the Conservatives held the majority and not the Liberals, that this was possible. But it's one thing to say, is this possible? It's another to actually do it. So this landmark ruling by the Supreme Court only last Friday is absolutely historic. And that was absolutely not only a historic moment, but also a spiritually significant story that we covered on Behind the Headlines. And Reagan, you know, this is what it really showed with when Christians actually take a stand. And the reason that the overthrowing of Roe versus Wade, America's federal abortion laws, came about is because Christians got politically active. They made the Republican support, the Christians made their support for the Republican Party conditional on base of the party taking a tough stance on the issue of abortion. And of course, then we saw the results. We've seen, for example, the horrendous protests that took place in the aftermath of this, the anger and the rage and the hatred that followed this decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's not as if this was saying that all abortion in America is going to be outlawed. Effectively, it was saying it's up to the states rather than federal government to decide whether abortion should be in place or not. But it's incredible to see how our mainstream media here in Britain and in Europe has portrayed the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States, really saying that this is going back to the Stone Age, this is affecting women's rights. And yet if we look at it from God's perspective, this is preserving human life.
Yeah, it really has been interesting to see the backlash that this has received. It was not, it hasn't been quite as sustained in its severity as I anticipated it would be. I think it has become very clear and people have understood. Actually, this law, while it's right that it's been struck down, right now it's gone back to the state's power. And so what this in theory means is that actually some states could potentially become more pro-abortion than they have been. And this is one of the things we need to pray against, and this is where the pro-life lobby and organizations, crisis pregnancy help centers, churches need to be prepared in the coming days. What we've seen already in Georgia is that there has been an increase in people in some areas voting Democrat. Republican voters cannot become complacent and stop showing up to vote, because all it takes is for Democrat voters to vote in someone who's very pro-abortion, to vote in legislatures who are able to basically promote abortion legislation in each state. That's what's happening in some places, but there are encouraging signs that many states will continue to remain very pro-life. My home state, I was thankful, the state of Arkansas, the state of Mississippi, there were others as well, I believe Missouri, they have already put in, along with so many others, pro-life legislation. It's anticipated that around half of the states will continue to have very strong heartbeat bills or complete bans on abortion. And
of course, this is one of the legacies of President Trump as well. The fact that he appointed two conservative judges to the US Supreme Court, particularly Amy Barrett, who has taken an incredible, brave and courageous decision to go against the US media, to go against the Biden administration, and to do what she feels right in her own conscience on behalf of America. And we know that spiritually as well, that abortion actually pollutes the spiritual atmosphere of a nation. It turns God against the nation, and you want to feel the contrast. Go to a nation where there are abortion laws in place, and then go to a nation like ours where they're not, and you'll find that you'll see the spiritual difference massively. Of course, the other issue I think we need to discuss as it relates to this topic as well is that Biden was able to make capital out of this Roe v. Wade overturning by the Supreme Court in the midterm elections in November to kind of galvanize the Democratic support base for him. Now, one of the issues that we talked about, and this is, I think, a constant theme of 2022, was that we are moving so close towards a digital currency, that we're moving so close towards a cashless society, that we covered a news story where you could actually have a credit card chip in your hand as a little chip. And we ask, is this moving towards the mark of the beast?
Yeah, it's again following on from a couple of conversations we've had. This particular story was quite disturbing, and at the same time, you can find an element of dark humor in it, in that these chips weren't particularly working. So the company had installed these chips in people's hands, I believe in Sweden, if I recall it correctly, and a good number of people had signed up, were very, very keen. This was being presented as a possible initiative that would, if successful, spread globally. But there were already reports of some tills not accepting the
hand. Because I remember covering this story. Is literally the chip is literally a grain of size of a
grain of rice.
Grain of rice, yeah, sorry. And you put that into, is then injected into your hand, under your skin, under your right hand. And you can go to anything like a contactless card and put it there, and it will actually scan your hand rather than actually finding your credit card, putting your credit card out, and it's all done for convenience. Now, the one thing we see, whether it's the Elon Musk's cars, for example, the latest high-tech cars, or whether it's this chip in your hand as a credit card, that people that are into tech and innovation sign up for this massively. So we know that it has teething problems. I think the inventor was a Polish-British businessman who invented this idea. And of course, we can see that this is the direction that they're taking. So let's have a look back at this previous edition of Behind Headlines, where we talk about how a company has developed a chip that you can have in your right hand that acts as a debit or credit card. This is quite a headline in the papers. So it says, it was entitled, "Would you plant a tiny debit card chip in your hand? Forget fingerprint or face recognition, biometric payments is being touted as the future." And this is also connected with the global move towards transhumanism.
Well, we're definitely seeing an increase in pressure toward a transhumanistic fulfillment of various theories, and essentially the sort of thing that we were seeing in sci-fi films back in the 80s and 90s, particularly becoming reality. So much of what we're seeing being presented as possible for the near future, it looks like RoboCop. We've talked about Captain America, Iron Man, even
Terminator.
Yeah, Terminator, Blade Runner. all of those sorts of things where you look and think, this is, all of these things were dystopia. We have to remember that. So much of what is sci-fi that's been out there for years that looks like it's becoming reality was rooted in some dystopian view of the future. But people continue to regress toward that place wherein there is absolute chaos, there's absolute denial of objective truth, absolute rebellion against God's design for us. We have individuals like Elon Musk who, he's very wealthy, in the top 5 wealthiest individuals on the planet, billionaire, big in space exploration, big in driving forward this electric car company, Tesla, and all that it's involved in, but also a massive advocate for transhumanism. Musk has spoken of how he desires to do further research and almost as a pet project see about the possibility and potential of merging the human consciousness with the cloud, this digital interface that is out there for storing information. And in Musk's idea, eventually the merger of consciousness with the cloud will enable us to have eternal life. Okay, well, we know how we can have eternal life. Jesus tells us how we can have eternal life. God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And we're looking forward to that day of resurrection. But that we can't believe. That we don't want to believe in this post-truth society. But merging the human consciousness with the cloud, we'll go for that. What we're doing, Simon, is essentially the modern day equivalent of the Tower of Babel. This transhumanism stuff isn't going away. We continue to see developments towards it. We've talked in the past about how this is going to only increase and there'll be further adaptation of the human body. Elon Musk has talked about trying to link human consciousness to the cloud. However impossible we think some of these things may be, that's not what's that's not the focus. The focus is these are direct attacks against and onslaughts against the reality of God's authority, creating a Tower of Babel-esque attitude of arrogance and pride toward our Creator.
No, absolutely. And of course, if we have a look at the direction that technology is placing, I remember reading one article soon that the founder of Google reckons that Google will be placed within 2 years by artificial intelligence. We also see that the introduction within the next couple of years of robots doing kind of manual jobs and manual tasks, which means that so many people are going to be unemployed as well. So, with this technological advancement and the closer this technology develops, and particularly the technology of artificial intelligence is moving forward, it means that we are moving more towards an authoritarian future, a more dystopian future, because within these developments of new technology, it's giving power into the elite hands. And of course, then the great danger is developing now is that they're creating artificial intelligence that is actually more intelligent than humanity. Yeah. And then who controls what? Does it become the AI robots that become more powerful than mankind? Or is man still able to control them, or will they be used to bring about an authoritarian regime? And that's the direction that we're heading in. So many different moral questions are posed by this, particularly as I think it would have been unimaginable even a few years to think that you could have a chip the size of a rice grain in your right hand that would act as a debit card reader. You combine that with putting on your ID, on it, your identification, your passport, your doctor's certificate, your place of work, insurance details, and before you know it, you've got the mark of the beast. But we know that the mark of the beast, when it looks at in the book of Revelation 13, it talks about how the Antichrist forces those rich and poor to receive the beast, but first they must worship the beast, in other words, worship Satan before they receive the mark of the beast.
We're also seeing, as you mentioned, some of those advancements in AI and robotics. In San Francisco, they recently, thankfully, they struck the introduction of this law down. It's only a matter of time before others, or maybe San Francisco, introduces a law allowing armed robots. I mean, you can find this, it sounds ridiculous, but there actually was this attempt to introduce armed robots to the San Francisco police force, to introduce them to particular zones where there was some violent crime or there needed to be. I mean, that's never going to go bad, is it? Yeah, how many times have we mentioned Blade Runner, RoboCop, Brave New World, 1984 in the past year in terms of
Terminator, and there's another one as well, The Minority Report.
That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things, you kind of look and think, it's not a good idea. It's bad. It's a bad idea. That's the whole premise of these sci-fi films. But we're seeing a lot of what has in the past been viewed as sci-fi beginning to play out in reality. And when it's sci-fi, it makes for a good movie, perhaps. But when it becomes reality, then we should start asking some very serious and profound questions.
It also gives a different meaning to defunding the police. You're giving the police's jobs to robots with guns. What could go wrong?
Think of 2000, what was that? That film, Space. What is it?
Space Odyssey?
Yeah, maybe it's Space Odyssey. The one where Hal, the computer, basically refuses orders. Computers can start refusing orders. Robots can refuse orders and endanger people's lives. These programs can be overridden, they can be hacked, they can be hijacked, they can be used and abused. They can be used for good, and that's the difficult thing. Everything generally that's perverted and used for evil has a good purpose. It can be good. That's the history of mankind, though, is it not? There's a lot of good, but so much that God created that was good, everything that He created that was good, we've managed to take and pervert in some way.
No, absolutely. Other stories, I think, that made real significance in 2022. I mean, if we take for Israel, they had another general election, I think the 5th general election in 3 years in November, where the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was actually won the election. It's a question of whether he can put the coalition together in time. So we'll know by the end of this showing of this program or not, whether Israel faces another election. We also see that Israel's had, I think, potentially 3 prime ministers this year, going from Naftali Bennett, whose own party pulled out of his coalition government. Yair Lapid became prime minister. Of course, we also then saw the first official state visit on behalf of President Biden to Israel, where he didn't handshake Yair Lapid or Naftali Bennett, but went straight to Benjamin Netanyahu and shook his hand, even though he was the opposition leader. We also see that Biden was talking up about the friendship and the strategic importance of America's relationship with Israel. Then he goes to the Palestinian Authority on the Mount of Olives and meets with representatives of the PA, where not one single Israeli journalist is invited. And then he goes on a rant saying, I know what it's like to be oppressed like the Palestinians, because as an Irish American, I know what it's like to be oppressed by the British. So not only did he offend Israel during that trip, he also offended the British as well. And of course, then what he also did was weaken the Abraham Accords by wanting Jordan and also the Palestinian Authority be a part of that with sensitive military cooperation. But also this also meant that he snubbed Saudi Arabia as well, who was looking to get Saudi oil back onto the market. So kind of a disastrous foreign policy trip for Biden. But one of the biggest developments, I think, in 2022 was the regime's war against the women, and how one Iranian Kurdish woman who was detained, was beaten up while she was detained by the Iranian morality police, sparked unprecedented, and I mean unprecedented, protests and riots throughout the whole regime, where they were shouted death to the dictator. We also saw that religious cities like Qums were set on fire and set alight, where they burnt their hijabs. How significant do you think it is that we saw this widespread revolution in Iran? And because many Bible people think that the Iranian regime has to be in place in order to fill Ezekiel 38 and 39's invasion of Israel. And yet what we're seeing is that the Iranian people completely rejected political Islam, and there's only a question of time before this regime's days are numbered.
Yeah, I think we are seeing some immense progress in the removal at some point, hopefully in the near future, of the Ayatollah and a complete change of the regime. But we do have to recognize the power that the Ayatollahs have had, that the Iranian regime as it is has. You've had thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people protesting, and it's had very little impact. Okay, they've said they've suspended the morality police, that they're not going to be active anymore, but under whose accountability is that going to remain? You can suspend the title, but will you suspend the action? I'm not convinced, because this idea of controlling individuals' morality based on how you're wearing the hijab or not, in the instance to which you referred, featuring the Iranian Kurdish woman who was killed, they, I believe, will continue to try to enforce their rule. I have a friend he's a refugee from Iran, and he's told me the story of how he was with a girlfriend on one occasion, and they were set on 2 park benches in a public place, and they were talking. And that they were reprimanded, and he was brought into the police station for a caution because they were sat in a public place talking and were too close to each other, even though they were on 2 separate park benches. It's bizarre. And this is what viewers, we so often don't understand just the severity of it. We so often think, well, is it really that bad? And when it comes to Iran, yes, it really is often that bad. The common populace of Iran is in a state where they've had widespread drought and shortages of water. They are really struggling in their economy, and they're fed up with the oppression that they've endured for so long, for so many years. They were promised much. They were promised much during the revolution and during the removal of the Shah, but that's all come to very, very little. And I think if the people continue to protest, and you begin to see various groups within the military especially, I think that will be critical. If there are any groups within the military, any significant leaders who begin to change their mind, who begin to turn towards the people with favor, then you have a completely different state of affairs. So here's a little bit of that report, asking, has the Iranian regime gone too far in its war against women?
The young Iranian woman who was 22, called Mahsa Amini, who was taken into custody in Tehran for not wearing a headscarf properly, known as the hijab. We see a picture of her there. And while she was in police custody, it looks like she was brutally murdered and died in police custody in Iran. And of course, this has sparked the largest protests and demonstrations in Iran's history since the Iranian regime came to power in 1979. That was 43 years ago. And so we're asking, is this the beginning of the end of the Iranian regime? And have the regime pushed the Iranian women too far? Reagan, it's great that you can be back on Behind the Headlines. I know that you've been doing a lot of funerals and weddings, and doing a remake of 4 Weddings and a Funeral to bring up to date. So it's good to have you back on the programme. It's
good to be back, Simon. Good to be back. And what an important topic to come back to. It's a topic that's very close to my heart, as for some time the people of Iran have been on my mind and in my prayers. Particularly as in our church, we have had a number of men who have themselves faced great ostracization from their families because of their faith in Christ from Iran. I've been to Kurdistan. It's interesting, you know, that the Kurds have been very vocal in expressing their condemnation of Iran over this particular event.
And also, who can forget those very, very moving scenes in England's opening game against the Islamic Republic of Iran, when those brave Iranian footballers refused to sing the Iranian national anthem in solidarity with the women and the people of Iran protesting for their freedoms. And we also saw many of those footballers who actually called that Iran should be kicked out of Qatar World Cup 2020, and many of them even hid the badge on their shirts, which is the flag of the Iranian regime. And we have to pray for the people of Iran that they would have the courage and protection, that God would do something miraculous in that nation, as we know that the gospel is spreading like wildfire in the world's most dangerous regime.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. Now, the situation in Iran can be described as dystopian. We looked at the beginning of the year and saw and have seen throughout that Russia's actions in Ukraine, dystopian. This word has come up time and time again, but we had also an exploration of something that is a little futuristic, but you look at it and you think, well, this is actually not going to be that far away. We asked the question, will Neom be a city of the future or a dystopian nightmare? And we explored this new Saudi Arabian city that is referred to as Neom, or the Line. And yeah, well, see what you think. The vision behind the multi-billion pound megacity Neom that is being built in Saudi Arabia. It's a futuristic city. The concept features renewable energy. Located in the desert, the city is known simply as the Line. And as we'll see in a little while, there's a reason as to why it is called the Line, but it is 200 meters across, 110 miles long, that is aimed to be the home of some 5 million people. It will have its own digital currency, will be run almost entirely by artificial intelligence with facial recognition cameras everywhere. The question we're asking this evening is this the city of the future, or will it be a dystopian nightmare? Or Simon, could it possibly be both?
I think it could be both. What was extraordinary, I don't know if you remember back to 2020, and we saw some adverts on our television for Neom that appeared on television, something about this new futuristic settlement or civilization that was being built and by the Saudis, and I didn't really kind of know what it was, but after just seeing a little bit more, watching this vision, the Saudi vision for this new city, Neom, it seems that this is the most advanced futuristic city now being built anywhere on the planet. And of course, it does have repercussions for Bible prophecy. It is using all the latest technology, and also wants to use technology that hasn't even been built yet. I mean, they're talking about this could cost in the region of over $1 trillion US dollars to actually build. It's meant to be in place by 2030. And we'll just see, but it's extraordinary to think that this is the idea of the future. It's a cashless society where artificial intelligence, or AI, meets our needs, supplies us with food. You've got robots taking out your rubbish. There's no need for cars because there's a supersonic transportation system that you can go from one end of the line, which is this 5 million capacity city, from one end of Saudi Arabia to the other. But also has huge implications for Israel, for Egypt, and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia wants to see this as being the new hub in the Middle East to rival that of Dubai. And it goes definitely into the realms of sci-fi. So just a reminder, if you want to see previous editions of Behind the Headlines, issues and topics that we've covered in 2022, then go to our website, revelationtv.com, go on video on demand on Behind the Headlines to watch the back catalogue of programmes, even going into 2020, plus also on our YouTube channel as well. And also want to thank you for watching Behind the Headlines in 2022 as we've unpacked some of the major key prophetic developments that have occurred this year.
Thank you so much for tuning into this special review edition of the 2022's major events from Behind the Headlines. We're not going anywhere. God willing, we still will be here in 2023, and we're looking forward to bringing you more insights. We hope insights that are both biblical, helpful, practical, and transforming as well as you consider the practical applications in 2023. So happy New Year. We ask that God would bless you and keep you as we enter into 2023, and look forward to seeing more of you on Revelation TV.